Hello. This is a video on Midnight Marauders by A Tribe Called Quest, brought to you by Digging the Graves. I will be breaking down this album, recreating some of the legendary beats from the original samples, talking with mixer and engineer Bob Power on the creation of this album, and seeing 4 distinct ways that this album is monumental for hip-hop and music history in general. We hope that you will find this video precise, bass heavy, and just right.
Oh, sorry, that's a short sample of Blackstone Legacy by Woody Shaw from 1971. That's the first sound you hear on the first song of this album, Steve Biko, Stir It Up. But this short sample has been pitched up and down to become this iconic opening intro. Phife comes in then when the beat drops. It's a combination of a couple more samples. The drum is a Kool and the Gang sample that's been slowed way down and chopped. And we're going to talk a lot about the drums on this album, but one thing I love all throughout this album is how musical the whole thing is. Like, take the Kool and the Gang drum sample. Here's the original. Slow it down. This is as slow as I can go on the turntable. But here's the isolated drums from Tribe. The sound of the drums is different, which we'll talk about why in a second, but also the phrasing is different. The drum pattern is slightly different. This song serves as an introduction to the album. Q-Tip and Phife are both on this, trading verses. The production is on point, the lyrics are on point. Tip and Phife split a verse in a classic back and forth.
MCs like to meddle, well here's my proposition, I let my lyrics flow and jump your whole position. I'm radical with this like the man as long as after. Tip, settle down, what's the reason for the laughter?
I really can't say, I guess I'll have to keep crying. So what's going on? People killing, people dying. But I won't go on that. I think I'll elevate my mental. Thanks for these bars on the Biko instrumental.
Steve Biko was a South African anti-apartheid activist, which is who this song was named after. Right out of the gate, this album is firing on all cylinders. Musically, lyrically, the samples, the production, the rhymes. It's the perfect way to open the album and preview what's to come.
Midnight Marauders was released on November 9th, 1993, just over 2 years after the group's previous album, The Low End Theory. This album was revolutionary for its use of jazz samples, sonic focus on the lower frequencies, and how clean the samples sound that are layered on top of each other. The Low End Theory was a huge album for Tribe and influenced many other artists. So when it came to releasing their follow-up, Midnight Marauders, the group leveled up again, developing their sound, rhymes, and low end even more. This brings us to the first way this album is monumental for music history. Not only is Tribe in peak form, this can be seen as the pinnacle of the native tongues movement. You could call it a victory lap, or you could call it an award tour.
Let me show you how complex this song is. For the drums, we've got a sample from Sons of Chaplin from 1969. That's the purple track here. We got a guitar line from Charles Erlin from 1973. Then we got a keys line from Weldon Irvin from 1975. There's a vibraphone sample later in the song, a low bass sound that's in interpolation from the group Jade from 1992, and then we've got vocal on top of all of that. And the hook is from a fellow Native Tongues member, Trugoy the Dove, aka Dave from De La Soul. Rest in peace. It's not just one sample driving the main sound here, there's individual instruments all combining to make this song. And what you're not seeing is, for instance, this keyboard line right here is pitched down 2 semitones and 33 cents. This guitar line is down 2 semitones and 11. These drums here are up 2 and 28. So there's lots of little adjustments here, and I'm not even quite there. But let's hear my recreation. Pretty rough, but you get the idea. The thing is, there's more going on here than just these samples. I recently spoke with Bob Power, who was the recording engineer and mixer for both this album and The Low End Theory. And as he explains,
I spent a lot of time on the low-end theory sculpting the elements so it almost sounded like people were sitting down and playing it, but they never would because they all came from different records, and that's where the coolness of the feel comes in.
Yeah.
Tip and Ali both came to me before Midnight Marauders, and I remember one time them saying very directly to me, listen, we want this to be like a gritty street-style record, so don't clean things up. Part of the reason why the low-end theory was such a groundbreaking record, and the first record as well, going into Midnight Marauders, was you have to remember what sampling was like at the time. I mean, it started out where all people could sample would be a kick and a snare separately, boom, cack, and that was it. No longer loops. Anything longer you heard was cut in by a DJ. So as sampling time increased, the constructions got more and more complex. So by the time Midnight Marauders came around, I think we were up to, with memory enhancements, up to 6 or 10 seconds of sampling time in different samplers. I think by that time, Tip and Ali had their own studios in their places. But for the most part, until then, nobody had enough gear to be able to hear the realization of what they heard in their head before they got to the studio.
Yeah.
Because in the studio, it was painstaking. If there was a 1-bar drum loop, we would sample the first half, boom, cack, ka-goom, and then lay that down onto 1 track or 2-inch tape, and then take the second half of that bar, goom, cack, ka-goom, goom, cack. And so we'd have boom, cack, and then goom, goom, cack on a different track, and we'd have to put those together. So these guys, the amazing thing to me, and it's more amazing as time goes on and I think about it, is that Tip and Ali and everybody involved heard these constructions in their head before they had a chance to actually hear them coming out of some speakers. Yeah. And it's an amazing feat of conceptualization, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, on Midnight Marauders, there were very specific instructions of not to clean it up too much.
Yeah.
Or at all, really.
Midnight Marauders has a grittier sound than the low-end theory. It still sounds like a Tribe Called Quest, but simultaneously has more grit and more sheen to the sound. Sheen is how Q-Tip has described the sound, crediting the SSL mixing console, as opposed to the Neve, which was used on the low-end theory. But there is another influence on the sound of Midnight Marauders. Q-Tip has said that NWA's album Straight Outta Compton inspired Tribe to make the low-end theory, which is what Dr. Dre says inspired him to make his album The Chronic from 1992. But the cycle of inspiration continued, as Q-Tip said, when I heard The Chronic, I was like, ah. And when I heard The Chronic is when we made Midnight Marauders. And then he put out Snoop, and I heard Wu-Tang. I was like, I'm gonna go home and eat pie. This is the second way that Midnight Marauders is tied in with music history as part of the cyclical nature of inspiration.
All right, should we talk about this? Okay, really quick. I've gotten a lot of requests for a Dig in the Great shirt. And look, if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. You know what I mean? This is not some print-on-demand, direct-to-garment nonsense. This is a max heavyweight garment dye, pre-shrunk, slightly oversized t-shirt, the absolute best quality I could find. Premium screen print. The lettering on this is puff ink. But check out the back. Ba-bam! These letters are a light puff on the back as well. Got your retro vibe. If this isn't your style, I totally get it, that's fine. But check out the other one. Yeah, I'm announcing 2 shirts today. I am so happy with these. They look amazing. They feel great. I'm so excited for you to get one. Go to diggingthegreats.com to get yours right now. Link in the description. Shipping worldwide, direct from me to you. This album is full of witty lyrics, clever wordplay, and a solid back and forth between Phife Dawg and Q-Tip. But we also get solo songs like 8 Million Stories, which features just Phife telling a story about what a terrible day he's had. Features a very funky bass line, the biggest kick drum I've ever heard, and Tip reflecting on the use of the N-word. This is one that I can't break down in a YouTube video since it'll definitely get flagged, plus, subject-wise, we don't need a white guy on YouTube giving his thoughts about this. Incredible beat though. This album is incredibly musical, not just because they're good samples, but how they all fit together, how parts come in and out. It's fully arranged, the same way a composer might write parts for different instruments or rests for other spots. The song Midnight features Raphael Saadiq on bass. We Can Get Down feels like you could take the drums out and it would be just as musical. Speaking of the drums, they're insane. Not only are they loud in the mix and feel incredible, but as Bob Power explains, there's a lot more to it than just a single drum sample. Because I'm curious, you mentioned the sampling the first part of a drum break and then the second, and then you got it on 2 different tracks. Logistically, what does this specific layout look like if you're mixing a track like that? Like if you've got that drum sample on split between 2 different tracks, or then you've got a bass sample or some other instrument versus the vocal, like how many tracks are you expanding out to?
Well, then we were working on 2-inch tape, and it was 24 track, but because we had time code, which for those people who don't know, it's a synchronization code that you print on 1 track of the tape. And you couldn't use that track, and you also couldn't use the track next to it because there was bleed over, and you'd hear this like computer tone along with whatever you put on the track. So really, we were down to 22 tracks. And it was kind of a sleight of hand because the music got pretty complicated. And plus, we would hide in other samples behind a loop. For example, if there was a drum loop, we'd program a kick and a snare that we'd put behind the loop. And you didn't hear it as a separate element, but you just say, wow, that kick and the snare is really slamming. Yeah. So there was a lot of sleight of hand involved, and it was because the technology was so primitive then, it was really a lot of work, man.
Yeah, I can imagine. By the way, my full conversation with Bob Power is now available on the Digging the Greats podcast, as well as the complimentary YouTube channel Digging the Talks. Bob is a legendary mixer and engineer, known not only for his work with Tribe, but other Native Tongues artists like De La Soul, the Jungle Brothers, but then also into the Soulquarians movement with D'Angelo, Erykah Badu, The Roots, and so many more. Links in the description, podcast or video interview, take your pick. A great culmination of everything we've talked about so far is the next song, Electric Relaxation. It's an incredibly musical track that features a sample of Mystic Brew by Ronnie Foster from 1972. I've pitched it down a little bit, here it is. That's also a 3-bar phrase, which is pretty unusual. We've got drums chopped from Outside Love by Brethren from 1970. And a chopped up keys sound effect from Ramsey Lewis's Dreams from 1973. Sorry, the song is called Dreams. They didn't sample Ramsey Lewis's Dreams for this. Anyway, here it is. That effect basically over and over. Now you add that all together and... gets you close, but not quite. I don't have the other samples that are layered in like with the drums or the low pass tracks in there either. Lyrically, Phife said that on this song he and Q-Tip wrote their own lines and then traded when they recorded. With the smooth back and forth and relaxed groove, it feels like a combination of Check the Rhyme and Bonita Applebum off their 2 previous albums.
The third way Midnight Marauders is tied in with music history is its lasting influence. Not only did it influence the sound of other artists through inspiration, but after this album, Q-Tip himself directly produced for other artists such as Nas, Mobb Deep, Crooklyn Dodgers, and more. To review, Midnight Marauders is the pinnacle of the Native Tongues movement, simultaneously inspiring and inspired by Dr. Dre's West Coast G-Funk production, and inspiring a new generation of New York artists through the 90s. But there is one more very notable thing about this album, specifically the day that it was released. More on that in a moment.
The song Clap Your Hands features a sample of Nautilus by Bob James. Very iconic song. That's another continuation of everything we're talking about. And then we get to this one. I'm so sorry. We have to talk about the drums on this song because they're absolutely insane. Like, here's the original drum sample. If we slow this down, thicken it up a little bass, it's still not quite there. I mean, yeah, it needs to be chopped up because the pattern is slightly different, plus layered with other samples like Bob Powell explained, but still, the feel of these drums is insane. I mean, I don't have a way to talk about it. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. And here's the bass. Come on. What more do you want? And then you got the bass in there, you got the horns, you got the Busta Rhymes hook. It's absolutely ridiculous. I could listen to just this beat on loop for an hour, 2 hours, maybe all day, and I would never get tired of it. Keep It Rolling features Large Professor, which is the other song on this album that Tribe didn't produce. The Chase Part 2 is another one that has such a unique musical feel to it. After this song, the voice of the tour guide, the robotic female voice that's popped up throughout the album, she tells us that the program has concluded. This voice, by the way, is that of Laurel Dan, a secretary at Jive whose voice is digitized and pops up throughout the album. Speaking of voices, we gotta talk about the next song, Lyrics to Go. There are multiple samples in this song, including the Minnie Riperton song Inside My Love. That's where the Rhodes keyboard chords come from, but also within that sample is Minnie hitting a very high note. You may not have even noticed it in Lyrics to Go, but here's the original sample. Let's speed it up. That high note, that's Minnie. Still holding that high note. The way this album weaves samples together and the way it all feels, not like a collection of samples, but just how the song is. It's so musical. It's got an incredible feel, a perfect vibe for the rhyming on top. It's amazing.
Midnight Marauders concludes with the song God Lives Through, featuring layers of musically dissonant samples that combine for a mellow finale for the album. Between being the peak of the native tongues movement, the group leveling up after the low-end theory, and inspiring East and West Coast hip-hop, this album is monumental for a tribe called Quest, hip-hop, and music history as a whole. This album was released on November 9th, 1993, which is the final piece of the puzzle. Another landmark album was released on this day, Enter the Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers by the Mighty Wu-Tang Clan. This debut album launched the career of the group, but also the individual members, and had a huge impact, bringing a much grittier sound to balance out Tribe's sheen on this album.
I normally point to just one video at the end here, but today I'm going to do a choose your own adventure. So if you want to get into the story of Wu-Tang's debut, click here. For a deep dive into the low-end theory, click here.